Is Frank Lampard actually a good football manager? That's what's being discussed online right now. And I thought it would be an interesting topic for today's video, especially having a closer look into his stint in the Championship with Derby County previously. Now, as of recording, he's not been officially announced as the Coventry City manager, but it is being strongly rumoured he's the clear frontrunner right now. And by the time you guys are watching this, you may have more clarity on that situation. But Lampard will be the focus of today's video, and whether or not he'd be a hit for a club like Coventry right now. So the obvious place to start out with Frank Lampard is with his stint at Derby County. So what we're looking at here is the Championship League table in 2017/18, the season prior to Lampard getting the Derby job. Gary Rowett was the Derby boss at the time, and ultimately he secured a playoff finish for that side. They finished 6th in the Championship under Gary Rowett, accumulating 75 points throughout the season. So clearly Lampard was walking into what was already a good base of players at Derby who were capable of challenging in the upper echelons of the league table. Lampard then came into Derby that season and once again finished 6th with them. They finished on 74 points this season, made it all the way to the Championship playoff final, but just fell short, albeit against a very good Aston Villa side who were ultimately promoted. And you could probably look back on this Championship season in one of two ways really, in terms of how harsh you are on judging Lampard not getting that Derby squad up. Because on one hand, you do look at this team and it was one of the best sides in the Championship that season. The amount of star power they actually had in this side, they utilised the loan market really well, which is obviously something that Lampard obviously likes to lean into with his connections to a lot of big Premier League clubs, especially Chelsea. But while this obviously was a very talented Derby County squad, which they had added to, I mean, look at the rest of the Championship from that season. Look at the amount of massive teams in the league that season. You had Daniel Farke's Norwich, Chris Wilder, Sheffield United, Bielsa taking charge of Leeds United. You had West Brom, who were really strong and scoring a lot of goals that season. Aston Villa, who were massive. Middlesbrough, who pushed them all the way as well. It really was a top-heavy Championship season that year with a lot of quality sides. However, Derby were by no means an underdog that season, by any means. They had spent quite a lot of money in that summer transfer window, in the end not really utilising that money all too well. It is worth remembering that the summer that Lampard arrived, they had sold their top scorer from the previous season, Vidra, for quite a profit, and they went ahead and reinvested pretty much all of that money back into the squad, with the big signings being the likes of Martin Waghorn, Jack Marriott and Florian Jozefzoon. Of those three signings that all came in for big money by Championship standards, Derby made a loss on all of them when they eventually left the club. But the real success that Lampard had in this transfer window was with their loanees, and in the end that was who they were really reliant on, the likes of Harry Wilson, Mason Mount, Fikayo Tomori especially, who were all absolutely brilliant for Derby that season. And one area where you could argue that Lampard maybe got out of jail a little bit in that playoff final year with Derby was he was carried a little bit by some of the stars within his team. We'll dive into some of the underlying numbers. Now, I know that underlying data and numbers and things like this is by no means the be-all and end-all, and at the end of the day, it's all about getting points on the board. But statistically, in 2018/19, Derby weren't actually that great of a side when you look into a lot of the underlying numbers. Take XG here, for example. In terms of chance creation from that season under Lampard, Derby were actually one of the worst teams in the Championship. There were only 6 teams in that Championship season that accumulated a lower XG than Derby did, and that's despite having some of the best forwards in the league available at Lampard's disposal that season. They only accumulated an XG of 55.7. However, the reason they were able to be so prolific in the end is because they were just absolutely clinical in taking their chances, and that's because they had so many of those top quality loanees, the likes of Mount and Wilson especially, massively overperformed their XG. They overperformed their XG by 12.3 goals in the end, which was the second biggest of any Championship club that season. So whether or not that suggests some of those top players got Lampard and that rest of the squad out of jail more often than not, I don't know. To be fair, in terms of XG conceded that season, Derby were a steady side. They were the 8th best in the Championship for XG faced that year, but lack of chance creation was a bit of a flaw, we could perhaps say. But at the end of the day, he did still manage to deliver a playoff finish for Derby, had that bonkers 2 games actually, in the playoff semi-finals against Leeds United, and there was all of the backstory of Spygate that season as well. Got them to the playoff final, and ultimately I don't think there's much shame in losing to an Aston Villa side who themselves were absolutely stacked by Championship standards. Then on the back of that season, Lampard then landed the Chelsea job. A lot of people at the time argued he'd made that leap far too soon in his career. You could tell at Derby he was still very much a manager who was learning his trade as the season went on, but made the jump to Chelsea, and for what it's worth, I think it was quite a successful debut season at Stamford Bridge for Frank Lampard. Despite working with a transfer embargo that season, they just lost their best player in Eden Hazard to Real Madrid as well. He was still able to deliver a top 4 finish, ultimately accumulating 66 points that season. Now, he was by no means walking into a terrible squad at Chelsea that year. They'd finished 3rd in the season before, and Maurizio Sarri had laid out a solid squad to build upon. And I think there is evidence of this in Lampard's career so far, that when he takes over from a previously established manager who's left behind solid foundations, Lampard is capable of adding his little touch of stardust maybe on top of that and meeting expectations. The problem with Lampard tends to come in the following season. And if we're being fair as well, in terms of chance creation in Lampard's debut season in charge of Chelsea, they were the 2nd best creative side in the Premier League that season. So if we're holding it against him that Derby's underlying numbers were poor, they were pretty good during his first season in charge of Chelsea. But speaking of that second season at Chelsea, this is where things started to unravel really. After having a transfer embargo in the previous season, Chelsea went absolutely mental in the transfer window, as they usually like to. Brought in a lot of big names, and Lampard really struggled to make that gel. He ultimately only lasted to January during his 2nd season in charge of Chelsea, and he was sacked after 19 matches, with the club sat 9th in the Premier League table, having only accumulated 29 points from their opening 19 matches. So clearly a lot of problems had popped up there. The next managerial job that Lampard then took on was Everton. He inherited Everton halfway through the 2021/22 campaign. He took over this Everton squad while they sat 16th in the Premier League, and ultimately secured a finish of 16th in the Premier League. So once again, Lampard in his first season meeting expectations. The aim at Everton that season was survival. He managed to secure that, and he sort of adapted the way he played throughout that season as well, showed that he was learning on the job still. He came into Everton with a bit of a maybe idealistic way of how he wanted to play football, quickly realised that wasn't going to work, adapted, so they were able to get the results to stay up in the Premier League. However, once again for Lampard, the problems really cropped up during his 2nd season at Everton. Once again, he was afforded quite a bit of money to spend in the summer transfer window. They just sold Richarlison, so had a bit of money to throw about. Ultimately, they spent 68 million that summer, and as was the case during his 2nd season in charge of Chelsea, Lampard just really struggled to make things gel with a lot of the new faces coming in. Once again, he only lasted until January during his 2nd season in charge, this time of Everton. He was sacked after 20 matches, with Everton sat 19th in the Premier League, having only accumulated 15 points from their opening 20 matches. And I mean, on that trajectory, they almost certainly would have been relegated. So where does that leave my thinking with Lampard, and could he be the man to take Coventry forward this season? Well, he'll be inheriting a squad, as of recording, that are sat 17th in the Championship table, albeit a side whose underlying numbers have actually been pretty promising so far this season. For chance creation, Coventry have been one of the better sides in the Championship this season. It's just they've been pretty wasteful in front of goal. And once again, they tend to limit the opposition to not that many chances against them either, as shown by their XG. They have been one of the strongest sides in the Championship in terms of the shots they've faced this season. Going off squad value, Coventry have the 8th most valuable squad in the Championship, so make no mistake about it, this should be a side that is challenging in the upper regions of the Championship, and they have been underperforming so far. I think on the evidence of Lampard and his career up until this point, he tends to get good starts out of his teams. He's good at building on the foundations already set by a good manager. And I think despite Coventry's inconsistent start to the season, there's a very good base to work upon there that Mark Robins has left behind. And you know what? I do think Lampard will get Coventry playing some nice football and moving up the championship table. My question with him, though, comes long term. Is he the right manager to reinvent himself, to bring players in, to get new players gelling into a system? And can he be successful at one club over a prolonged period of time? He's yet to answer that, and I think that will determine whether or not he's a success at a club like Coventry in the Championship. Well guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and get all your thoughts on Lampard in the comments down below. Other than that though guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.